My idea is to give a talk, or at least to have some thinking with you, to share some thinking with you about climate change and about societies. So when I say societies, it's very vague, but I'm thinking about maybe sometime we should say people, population, even maybe civilization. I am not a historian. I know a little bit of paleoclimatology, and sometime when you become older, it's fun to try to think about other things than what you have done for 40 years. So it was a pleasure to think a little bit about that. And I've been invited to make a talk in French, so you will see some part are in French, but don't worry, I will try to explain this in English. In the front of students this morning, it was nice because it was in French, and I had a very nice translator, very competent, and that was great. In fact, you know, it was interesting. There was a few questions. The people were completely different. Most of the people were interested in human sciences and language, different parts, you know, philology and so on. So that was quite nice. And because I am lazy, I decided to give more or less the same talk now in English. Okay. In fact, I think I would like to start saying that there are two types of archives that we can use to look at the past. And my idea or my talk is mainly try to give a few examples, and there are many, many more, but a few examples showing why in the past climate change have influenced human being, human decisions, and so on. And so I had first to explain, you know, what kind of archives we have, and it's very simple. I am sure you know everything about that, but I like to say that we have ancient knowledge, ancient archives, mainly because of geology, because of marine science, sediment, sea sediments, lake sediments. I should not forget ice cores also, and things like that. And they are, of course, you know that they are giving you some ideas about what was the change in the past in climate. And then if you try, and I will try to do this exercise with this example to look what kind of influence they had on the human being, on civilization, ancient civilization, and things like that. It's interesting. So the first, so there are really two types of archives. So I talk about ancient archives. Then, you know, it's very new science. New, well, most of the people are much younger here, so it's no problem. But I will say around 1950, the historian, for many reasons, become interested in the history of climate. And of course, they said, well, that's very nice what you do, you know, you look at CO2 in the old time and so on and so on. But let's just take the books, takes the archives, written archives, on papers, not in the soil, but in papers. And you will see, we believe that there are some information. And the main difference, of course, they're really focusing on, I would say, the last millennia, or the last millennium or something like that. But I am happy to speak about that here because I am sure that the Russian historian have a lot of document, and I know a few of these papers, but there are probably much more, which are written in Russian and never cited outside. And I think that's pity, because it was also a lot of influence of the change of climate during the last millennium in Russia or in this part of the world. And I think it will be very, very nice to have a small program linking historian between different countries. So in France, we have a school about that. In England, it was Lamb who wrote many things about the climate of the last few centuries. You are not very happy, huh? Me neither. What do I have to do? Okay? Thank you. And that's true that it's still a lot of things to do. We have Leroy Ladurie in France, and he was really promoting the story about the vineries and how the vineries were shifting, how the wine, and the French, they are interested in wines, was shifting with different period and so on. And he had a very, very nice thinking. He made a lot of books, very nice books. One book he wrote, he said, I started to give some story about l'an 1000, the year 1000. It's mythical, of course, subject. And he said at this time I was Marxist. And I've been really influenced by the Marxism, by the communism also. And I had a view, a real view, that how important was probably the climate on the life of the people. He said since this time I changed a little bit my view, but nevertheless, that was the start. And he said a lot of things like that. He produced a lot of books. So just to keep this story a little bit shorter, remember archives, ancient archives. You go in the soil, you go where you wish, and you do like your directrice and take the message, and then you have historian, and that's not exactly for the same period. Now, when I was thinking to discuss a little bit the influence of the climate on the societies, I said it's maybe completely hopeless because in fact, just look. Today you have people living in Siberia, living in Greenland, and they are living in very difficult areas. They have no problem, and they develop cultures and things like that. So probably climate may have an influence, but not necessarily the largest influence, and I think it's also interesting. Another good example is those people who are living in the forest, in the tropical forest, and so on. It's a very hard life. They are here. They are maybe happy also, and so that's we should keep this in mind. Except that now, if you really look at the archives, you understand that archives will not, the climate will not explain everything which was changing in the societies, but it was certainly influencing at certain periods. Okay, so that was a sort of introduction of the topic. Then how I can shift? Yeah.
Oh, I think you have to. Oh, you can push the button here.
Yeah. Okay. So I need my glasses. And still in the introduction, I will not speak exactly in details what is the status of the understanding of the climate today, what was the role of IPCC, all these things. I am sure you know very well this, and it's a little bit boring to repeat all the time the same things. So I will try to focus on other things. Okay, let's see. Works. Yeah, this is in French, but we are finished with that. We will take this away and go to this. You know this this curve. It's quite old, you know, but it gives you a feeling about the fact that the climate was changing since the beginning and the birth of the atmosphere of the atmosphere of our planet, with very large change. In fact, a lot of uncertainties, of course, for the oldest time, and then more precision in the new in the more recent time. So, of course, you remember this is billions of years. And if I show that, it's because, and I will not speak about biodiversity. I think biodiversity is very important. I am not an expert on that, and I will not speak about that. But for me, this is a very good picture to show that the climate, and maybe not only climate, but the climate at least, was really influencing the life and the development of the life on our planet. So it's my way to avoid to speak about biodiversity. But I believe biodiversity is really important. That's for sure. Then I will go to the more recent part, and this is a Vostok record here. This is the temperature based on isotopic measurement of ice, same kind of curve for another ice core in Antarctica for the same time, EPICAP. And that's it's not too much for you. That was for the people this morning, just to explain that we had very large change, glacial, interglacial change of about between 5 and 7 degrees C between glacial and interglacial mode, with a periodicity of about 100 kiloyears, and to show that most of the climate has been cold since the last 3 or 4 million years, but with nice oases where the life was able to develop a little bit more and more kindly. Okay, so that you know here. Of course, this is today. We are living in this part, the Holocene, all these things. And also, this morning, the people have been interested to see that. We know that. We see that very often. But it's because we are working on this. But the people, they were surprised to see that, and to see 20,000 years ago, in the maximum glacial period, the last one, the amount of ice, maybe close to the amount of ice in Antarctica, and today what is left. So, you know, we always believe that the people understand that, but you have to show that, because it's a good example to show the impact of the climate on the surface of the Earth. And then I will shift to the Holocene. So I don't feel comfortable to speak about Holocene because it's not really my topic, but some people at least here know much more. But when I present this, my view is just to say, and this is irritating the specialist of the Holocene, but it's a very quiet period in terms of climate, and compared to the big shift, glacial, interglacial. But the purpose, I'm not sure this graph is good, but my purpose was to say, okay, we know more about the societies during this period, so that's a good reason to discuss this. And of course, I would like to give a few examples based on the optimum, climatic optimum, speak a little bit on the medieval warm period and little ice age. But it's mainly to illustrate example and to show that even if we are in an interglacial, during 10,000 years or something like that, it was no. Of course, the change were not uniform on the Earth, but the amplitude of the change were not so big, and nevertheless, it has impacted quite a lot civilizations, the life of people, the economy, even revolution, things like that. I'm not completely sure about revolution, but okay. That's so that was the purpose to use this kind of time period, and I've been fascinated by this story about Green Sahara. So again, you certainly know a lot about that, but for me it was a little bit a discovery that 8,000 years ago a big change occurred. At this time, it was between, I think, this time between 1 and 10 million people on the Earth. Not so much, you know, more or less like Moscow. Probably that was. It's a lot of uncertainties, but. And the Sahara, which is still today one of the most difficult desert, arid, no life, and has been like that for 70,000 years, something like that. Suddenly, 8,000 years ago, become green. Become green, it's a poetic view, of course, of the story, but maybe not so much because the vegetation starting from the south was growing up, as far as I know, north, and just because the precipitation were changing strongly. And we understand why, and so during this period you had maybe several hundred of lakes in Sahara. You had vegetation, and you had cities. You had not only nomad people traveling, but real cities, and there are archaeological evidence for that, So it has really an impact. For me, it's a very, very strong influence of possible impact of the climate on the living people. And then, after 4,000 years, aridity came back, and the people, what they did, they migrate when it was possible. A few were trying to adapt. To survive, and probably a certain amount died. But the people who survived, they immigrated to the Nile Valley, and that was one way to make that the civilization in Mesopotamia was growing. So you see, it was probably not only the climate, but it was definitely a strong influence of climate. The second example I gave this morning was the story about ancient civilization. So again, civilization, I think we believe that civilization were starting about 5,000 years before Christus, and many in Asia, and then going through Mesopotamia and American continent. A little bit later, 3,000 years before the Christ, the Inca civilization was growing, and all this, just because effectively at this time, and linked with this effect happening in the intertropical zone, at this time you had a lot of summer, not dry summer, but humid summers. That was the beginning of the possibility to get agricultural feature important. And that was the way to start to have civilization with real big cities, growing. So I gave this example, and most, not all, but most of the civilization, at least a certain number of civilization disappeared, like the Inca. Inca, it's a good example. So I was showing this picture, especially in the Yucatan, in the present Mexico, and South Mexico. And definitely because of this humidity during the summer, because explosion of the agriculture, this was leading to large cities. Of course, they were able, to construct pyramids like the one you can see on the bottom, and that was a good way to try to connect that with paleo evidence from lakes. I think that's lakes. So that's the delta O18 signal of the ostracods. I don't know if we say ostracods in English. I'm not very specialist, but that's crustacea, small, very small living animals in the lakes. And of course, the O18 signal is a good proxy for precipitation, for humidity. And if you really do that in different lakes of this area, you have this kind of picture. I took one example where you have increasing precipitation going this way and less precipitation here, and you see that you had in fact, the growing part of the civilization has been definitely linked with the precipitation, and then also the way when the civilization disappeared. You know, that was dryness, serious dryness. So again, it's an example which can affect not only the people, not only societies, but maybe civilizations. Okay. Then what kind of... Okay, since I will go very quickly on that, because I know not a lot about that. But over the last millennium, again, I'm not necessarily sure that it has been global signal, but you had this medieval warming from 950 to 1300, or I don't know. And then we had the beginning of the Little Ice Age. Clearly, in certain parts of the world, and maybe more marked or more evident in the Northern Hemisphere, you had this change, which again are not very large change, but they may have a large effect, like the fluctuation of the glaciers and things like that. And during these periods, it's clear that you had epidemia, you had what else? You had clearly some decline in the economy, especially around the 17th century. Some people believe that it has been linked with the fact that the climate was colder and so on and so on. I am sure that it's a lot of other reasons that pure climatic reasons for this change. But they occurred clearly, and that's what the historian like to discuss, like really to, and we have certainly things to learn about that. Okay. Then well, second part was about industrial period. So I will go quickly on that, but you know, this industrial period, of course, when you show this period to the people which are not experts, the reactions are interesting, definitely, because if you read the newspaper, if you discuss with the people, with the political people, with the journalists, you can hear a lot of different points of view, and it's nice to try to show what is the state of the art of the knowledge. I will never say it is the truth, but the state of the art of the knowledge today, how it was maybe 10 years ago, how it will change probably in the future, and so on. And I think it's important that the people understand that we have to take into account the state of the art, not to say we are sure about that, but definitely it's probably the best thing that we can, best message we can say. Also, you know, that's why when I did this talk this morning, I was showing a few things, you know. I can tell you, if you show that the CO2 change at Vostok over the 400,000 years, when you tell the people that very likely the CO2 levels in the atmosphere never reach the present day levels and things like that. And when you say CO2 is not necessarily temperature, but CO2 is here, clearly the people are interested with that. And then another interesting reaction is when you show that. So that's I'm sure you know that this temperature change, global temperature change since 1800 or something like that, and you tell the people that at least part, but maybe some large part of the change. You can see a mean increase, but average increase, but it's not monotic. Of course, this partly can be explained by natural change, like the solar activity, like volcanoes and so on. I think we know quite a lot about the role of the volcanoes because that's not for a long duration. Say 3 years typically, they can change the surface temperature of the ocean and things like that. But okay, but when you tell the people, honestly, now it's a lot of progress which has been made in terms of modeling and trying to understand really what is forcing all this change. I think it's a consensus. So when you say consensus, the people believe it's 100% of the people. It's not exactly that, but a real consensus, and a great consensus, I would say. It's definitely that you cannot explain the change since the 70s without to take into account a real impact of the human activity, of the activity of the people, the activity of the societies, and so on. That's the state of the art, and then when you compare what happened here during this period and the past civilization, change documented with civilization and so on, and climate during this period, there are at least two factors, completely different. One is here you have the human impact, and this is well documented, at least through the CO2, because nobody will discuss the fact that the CO2 increased since the pre-industrial time is linked with human activities, and not only CO2, but methane and so on. So that's the first difference. And the second difference, which is really which should be stressed, is of course the increase in the population. So remember, at the beginning of the Holocene, 10,000 years ago, I think population was between 1 and 10 million of people. Maybe I think yes, more or less. Then 5,000 years ago, it was between 5 million and maybe 20 million people. And then the increase, become like an explosion. And so that's the second difference we can clearly put when we compare with ancient civilization and the past at the time where it was few people on the earth, and also the time few people on the earth and no influence by human activities. Then you you can show this kind of things that IPCC is showing. It's to say, look, the atmosphere is warming, ocean is warming, not only the surface. Now we know that also the first 1,000 meters of the ocean is warming, definitely. Increase of sea level because ice, the snow is melting, the ice is melting. Today it's something like 3 millimeters per year, maybe a little bit more. Arctic sea ice, we know this has been shown everywhere in the newspaper, snow cover and so on. But in fact, all this change, you know, similar change may have occurred definitely during the last millennium when the climate was not changing too much. You should remember the climate was changing a little bit more than 1 degree C since the time of the industrial period, beginning of the industrial period. And now, what the scientists, I will say the IPCC scientists said, they said, well, we believe that we should do everything not to increase the warming by more than 2 degrees C at the end of this century. And even, you know, it was a recent report claiming that it will be better to try to stop at 1.5 degrees C for the end of the century. What I think just by discussing by people, by experts in different fields and so on, is, if we summarize, is to say, yes, it's really risky, and yes, there are solutions, but there are two conditions, mainly. The first, we have not a lot of time. We are very close from 1.5 now. If we would like to level the warming at 2 degrees C, we have still a few years, let's say 10 years maybe, but it's not a lot of time. And this means that we should definitely, if we would like to do that, we should definitely change our way of life, change many things, and that's certainly the role of the political people, that's the role of the people themselves also. That's clear. Okay, so I think the risk is known. Okay, there are still solutions, but we have to work very quickly. What happens if we go more than 2 degrees C at the end of the century? If you ask the experts which are looking at the demography, you know, today we are 7.5 billion people on the world, and their different prospect, going from stabilizing up more or less at this level, and there are models showing it's still possible to do that. But in the case where we are not able to do that, you know, the mean prevision is to say 11 billion at the end of the century, and going up to 16 billion. So that's the kind of things we also can consider. And my conclusion, based on looking at the past and looking at societies, and looking at what happened today, will be okay if we have a lesson to take from the past, it is certainly if we are not able to stabilize at 2 degrees C, for instance. Stabilize means then it will continue, but okay. At 2 degrees C, okay, we cannot learn many things about the past, just because the condition now, demography, and human impact are completely different. So we have really, it's difficult to take lessons from the past. If we are really going over 2 degrees C, then we can have real lessons from the past. Because the two main conclusions which can arise, and there are more, but maybe the two more, is immigration. And immigration has been, when the number of people of the earth was not so big, has been efficient, definitely. Or adaptation, but adaptation has been shown not so easy. So that's my point. I have one more remark, because we are in Russia. And Russia is a very special case, interesting case. And one question I had this morning was to say, but clearly, if you look at the past, take the Roman time, in fact, the people were not very happy with cold climate. So finally, why not to warm the climate? And that's definitely, and that's interesting. So the person who was asking that, I will meet this person tomorrow, and we will discuss that. My point is, and I may be wrong, but what we know now is very likely we will never reach an ice age again before 10 or 20,000 years, because you have the resilience time of the system. It's not possible because we are going too high in terms of changing the atmosphere. So that's the first thing. So don't worry too much about to have a cold climate. That's my first answer. The second is also interesting. I am absolutely convinced that the different nations have different problems. They have different conditions also. For me, it's why not Russia, big Russia, will not, on the average, profit of a warmer climate. That's okay. But then you have to take into account the balance between the people living in this kind of countries, which could be Canada also, which could be a different area, clearly, and the fact that 80% of the population is today living in the intertropical zone. And if you go to the intertropical zone, I did the exercise a few years ago discussing with people, that was in the frame of IPCC. And you go to Pakistan, you go to countries like that, but Bangladesh and so on. The people tell you, why are you telling us about climate change? Every day we have the consequence of the climate change. And they said in Karachi during the summer, now there are more than 3 weeks with a temperature higher than 40 degrees C, which was not the case before. And the people died from that, and so on and so on. So I think you have also to consider all the globe in a way, and it's easy to understand that the solution may be different from one country to another. Okay.
Thank you very much. I feel that Dominic already started to answer our questions, but we have different questions, by the way.
Yeah.
I think, at least I have different questions. So please, you can ask questions. You can ask it in Russian if you wish, and I'll try to translate if you wish. And then I can translate the answer if you wish. Okay, so anybody?
I'm very interested about your opinion. You said that the paleoclimatology is a young science, and what is your feeling how it will develop in the near future? Just accumulating more data, or it has something more interesting to happen?
It's really difficult to answer this question. Clearly, it's beneficial. It's beneficial to increase everywhere in the world the knowledge of the past. That's, I think, it's clear. We have learned. The few examples I gave is showing that, but not only about the human impact, but about the understanding of the system. And one of the bad side of what happened today, you know, if you go in Russia, if you go in France, if you go in the United States, it's more and more money which is available to study what happened today and also what will be the future. It's important, I will never say the opposite, but if you do that, you are really weakening the understanding of the fundamental science behind the climate and things like that. And part of this is clearly because we are looking at the past, and the past condition, even if we don't understand everything, we have an integrated view of the results of the climate change. So I think, yes, the danger today is more and more not to put money in this part of the paleo. And I think for the long term, it's probably an error, yes, definitely. That was answering your question, or? No. No. Yeah.
Well, I mean also more generally for the science of paleoclimatology, what do you think will happen in what most interesting things we can learn like in next 10 years or something? What is your, because you have such a great experience of being in this field and having moved it forward, maybe you have some special...
Yes, probably because, you know, during my career, I was always interested to global problem. But more and more, I understand that the local, the regional, and we have a lot of deficiencies in the knowledge of the variability at the regional scale. So I will say certainly we have to accumulate data, but not only accumulate data, but then discuss the data, compare with different regions and so on. I think because it is certainly in the frame of IPCC, it's certainly one weakness. And during the last 5 years, I think, IPCC decided to make a new effort on that. So I think, yes, definitely, but maybe it's a partial view I have, but...
I have not very scientific question, but general. How do you think, can we predict our climatic future?
How can we predict? You know, first, to make prediction, I think you should not be alone. The time of Einstein people is finished. We have really to work in teams. We have really to work in an interdisciplinary way. That's why I'm claiming we should hear more about people working on the history and things like that. But certainly, I think we are really now entering since 1950 or something like that, the time where we need to have people working on modeling, acquisition of data, understanding the processes, and all these things together. And maybe my view is a little bit biased, but I don't know better experience than IPCC for that. I don't say IPCC that's a paradise, but of course there are weaknesses. But that's a big advantage to people, really experts from different fields, discussing together, working together. But working really, you should see how the people are working when they are writing the chapters. And I think that's probably the best way. The best way is probably, and also a good way, is before to publish something, to think a little bit about that. But my country should make an effort to publish. Russia should make an effort to publish. Certainly, but yes, we are entering now this period where, for the future, we need really to put all the information together and to have really groups reflecting and trying to get a consensus.
Простите, я должна объяснить, IPCC – это межправительственная комиссия экспертов по изменению климата. Может быть, не все знают.
Есть микрофон. Thank you very much, Professor Dominic. Very simple question. You have before graph. What's mean GG on your picture?
Greenhouse gases.
Okay, greenhouse.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, greenhouse gases is to say CO2, methane, N2O, those gases which are emitted also by human activities, if you are looking the present period.
Okay, greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
And
by
your opinion, next question and last question for me today. By your opinion, what's the most helpful for us for predicting in forecast for climatic changes, any methods or, I don't know, technology or approach? What do you think? So 3 things: technology, methods, and approaches.
When you speak about methods, what do you mean exactly? It's technology, I think.
For example, remote sensing or some kind of drilling deep, or even some botanical issue for old growing tree like this.
Yes, I'm not sure I see you.
You not catch my question?
Well, not precisely, yes, but it's maybe because a problem of my understanding of.
Well, more simplifying, what's the, by your opinion, best technology for just to understand climatic change in recent time?
Best technology for understanding. I think it's more or less what I said before. It's to say that if we would like to understand both the climate itself, and I think we understand quite a lot presently about the present climate, but also about consequence and the way to make that we have a way to also promote the future in terms of climate change. Again, I think the best thing is really to have a multidisciplinary approach, to have people proposing different way to understand, etc. If you are really trying to speak about understanding the climate, yes, there are still a lot of questions. We can still discuss, for instance, the impact, the long-term impact of the greenhouse gases. That's the kind, because it's complex. It's not only the the greenhouse effect, but it's much more. So the feedbacks and so on, the clouds, and so that's a really difficult subject. And probably the best way is to have a multidisciplinary approach, people interested in formation of clouds, people interested in what happened at the interface between the ocean and the atmosphere. So that's really what has been promoted during the last 20 years quite a lot. There are a lot of progress. But again, my view is we are able to tell you about a state of the art at the present time. Maybe in 5 years from now, this state of the art will change. The science is exactly that. I think we have to keep in mind that to know the truth in terms of science, we have to approach the truth, but it's difficult to believe that we will solve all the problems. I'm not sure if I understand well your question, but...
Thank you for your very interesting report. In the beginning of your report, I heard that you had analyzed the ice from Antarctica. Can you tell us about this, your experience?
Dominic, indeed, can you tell us something about the things that you the best know about those bubbles? Are those bubbles, I mean, you find the bubbles of the air trapped in the ice, and you can analyze all over the very long sections of 8,000 and almost a million years. But I'm interested in a question. My question is, are these the same bubbles as we have now in the air, or something is happening in there and they are biased? That's one question. And it's connected to the question of the leads and lags. Yeah. It's still not, the problem is still not solved. When you see the curves of the temperature changes and the changes of the greenhouse gases from the, say, Antarctica ice cores, they're very similar. They're very in phase. But it's not yet clear who is the first, who is changing the first. The temperature is driving the changes in the greenhouse gases, or on the contrary, the greenhouse gases are driving the temperature changes. And I'm interested in on the state of the art, and what do you think personally about it?
Okay. If you take really an ice core, so you have two messages linked with this problem. The first is temperature by analyzing the isotopic composition of the ice. But this gives you not the global temperature. This gives you the temperature over Antarctica at the time the ice was formed or the snow was falling. So that's first thing. So it's not a global signal. It's really a local signal or regional or Antarctic or maybe South Hemisphere or signal. That's the first thing. So you cannot claim that if you compare the CO2 that we measured in the ice core with this signal, temperature signal, you will discuss the global effect, who is first, who is second. Maybe you can discuss nicely and precisely what is the lead and lag between CO2 and Antarctic temperature, but not global temperature. That's the first things which is very important. So how can we solve the problem? The problem is not completely solved today. But how can we solve the problem if you would like to know what is the time lag, because that was the question, between the time lag, between the temperature and the CO2. Very likely, you have not a unique answer, because the temperature in the northern hemisphere is maybe changing not exactly at the same time, and we know that, than in the southern hemisphere. So really, this shows that the weakness to have a global view. Maybe try to have a global view is not the best thing to do, just because we understand very well that when you shift your climate, and we know that very well now because of the effect of the ocean, when you shift the temperature, when you warm the temperature in the north, you don't warm necessarily at the same time the temperature in the south. So that's already, to be honest, I think the question to know who is leading, who is the egg and who is, what do you say, la poule, okay? It's a bad question. It's really a bad question. It has nonsense. I think it's not a scientific question, definitely. So that's the first thing. Maybe that's all. but I can tell you, I will send you a new paper on that. Okay.
Very good. Because scientists are still discussing this question, I'm afraid, and we'll continue.
No.
Okay.
You mentioned the huge rise of CO2 at the present time. What do you think made the biggest impact on rising of CO2? Is it the human activities, or is there another reason why CO2?
You mean today?
Today,
Wait.
yes. Why is such a huge rise of CO2?
I think, as far as we know, I think it's quite clear, yes. Because the big advantage on that's the connection between the industrial people and what we observe in the atmosphere. Since the industrial period, the industry each year is able to tell you precisely, and that's clear, they are not changing the number, how much CO2 they are emitting for certain industry, and so we can have a general view. Then we look at what is left in the atmosphere. But at this time, the carbon cycle is important because to simplify, maybe half of the CO2 which is emitted is then transmitted to the ocean or interacting with the biosphere. So that's a little bit more complex, clearly. But we have no other way today to understand the shift from 280 ppmv in CO2 during the pre-industrial time, and today we have more than 400 ppmv. The only way, honestly, is that. That's what I can tell you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. In one of the slides you used two words together. The first one was Anthropocene. What do you mean by saying Anthropocene? And at the same slide, you showed that as far as I remember, there was said something about in industry revolution or something like this. What do you mean by saying Anthropocene? Is it the same as Quaternary? What is it?
Sorry, what I mean about industrial... Anthropocene. Oh, Anthropocene. Okay. Wow, wait, okay. Anthropocene is not necessarily industrial. It could be the effect of the agriculture. It could be many things. It's not necessarily only the industry. Anthropocene, as you know, because it's an interesting topic, but it's too early to decide if we are really entering a new era or not. It's a lot the people who are, really thinking about the definition of the era, and so they don't agree completely on that. I think it's too early to decide if we are entering a new era. That's in terms of the term era is, we are certainly entering a time which is completely different from what was during the Holocene period. That's I think. But Anthropocene is also a nice word because it's more easy for the people to understand that a period during which the human impact or the human contribution to changing the climate is important, become important. So that's the way I think we should understand that. But to decide if it is Anthropocene, we have to wait probably 10,000 years more.
May I comment? It's just a new term that not everybody is using. It means that the last decades when the human beings have started to really influence the Earth system, and some people call it Anthropocene, but many people who do not believe that it's really true ignore this term. Is it correct?
How do you think? What is duration of Anthropocene? 2 million years or 2,000 years? What is duration of Anthropocene?
Well, again, it's impossible to answer now this question. Let's wait. You know, you are like journalists who would like to know the day after a catastrophe is occurring. No, it's not the way to do. The way to do is take the time for this kind of question because they are really important for the human being and so on. And I think we should be careful with that. But again, the word is not completely ridiculous because it's possible that the beginning of such era, if you imagine, for instance, that when I said we will not enter an ice age before 10,000 years, probably before 50,000 years, it's a result of a calculation based on what we know when we were changing from interglacial to glacial, and there are two main factors. There are many others, as usually, but there are two important factors. That's the amount of ice on the globe, you know, that's Milankovitch theory, that's the amount of ice on the globe and the level of CO2 during the interglacials, which is not the same for all the interglacials. So just be patient for that.
Yeah, now I understand what the journalists are feeling when they are asking very simple questions. How long was the Anthropocene and when it started? So the real scientist will never tell you how long and when it started. They will tell what they know about different things. Okay.
But is it really an important question? I'm not sure.
Thank you very much, first of all. You had these pictures of how the temperature changed during the temperature change, the plots, how it changed during 500,000 years and 8,000 years. And these curves seem to be quite non-trivial. In particular, the colder periods are much longer than the warm ones, and so on. Is there any simple explanation for this?
You mean if you are looking at the glacial interglacial fluctuation? Yes, there are, of course, yes. It's mainly, in simple words, you need an excitement. You need an animal which excites your system. So what is exciting your system? That's the position. That's the orbital, what we call the orbital forcing, it's to say in simple words, the position of the Earth versus the Sun at different periods of the past. So that's what is really exciting your system. Why you will have this kind of... Then,
so it's just cosmophysics?
Yeah, at the beginning. That's that's what we know just now, but maybe we will change our mind later. But that's really. And then, what is sure, if you would like to change the temperature by 5 to 7 degrees C on the globe, on the Earth, you need big amplifier. And we know for a long time, and thanks to Milankovitch, but not only Milankovitch, but a group of people, we know that the amount of ice, the surface of ice on the Earth, if it is excited at the beginning for some reason by the orbital forcing, it will change. For instance, going to a warming. Because it will warm, we will melt ice, and the albedo effect will decrease. So this is important. And then we had to wait the results of the ice core for the CO2 to understand that that was not enough. And we know that it is a time lag. For that we know quite well, because the time lag is long between the CO2 and the ice volume. And then we can understand that, for instance, maybe in certain, especially in the southern hemisphere, the CO2 was first amplifying, and then, you know, the ice was melting and so on. So that's one possibility. And if you take that, just now, it's not a lot of contradictory modeling on that, but we evaluate the two effects 50-50 or 40-60%. So you excite your system with a very small amount of energy, and then you produce a big change in temperature.
And were there periods when there was no ice at all?
Say again?
Were there any periods when there was no ice at all on the globe?
Oh yes, long time ago, yes.
And so how long?
Long time, but it was also a time 200 million years ago, 250 million years ago, where the Earth was a snowball. It was, that's also a poetic view, but that was really, you know, all the oceans were frozen, and it was snow everywhere, nearly everywhere. We have geological evidence for that.
No, but the opposite, when there was no snow.
The opposite, yes, at the beginning, clearly at the beginning of the birth of the atmosphere, it was no ice.
No, but in the historic period?
I think so. I'm not. Should go back to my books. I don't know. But
Okay.
But yes. I think so. I think, for instance, at the time of the dinosaur, it was not a lot of ice, honestly. But I'm not specialist of the dinosaur.
We stopped by the dinosaurs here. Okay. So if you don't have any more questions, so I will thank Dominique for this interesting, inspiring presentation. And thank you for your attendance of this meeting. And I can switch to Russian because I'll talk about the next lecture. Следующая лекция в этом формате будет здесь же у нас в Институте географии. Она будет в июне, мы еще точно не знаем, в какое время. Будет лекция член-корреспондента Российской академии наук профессора Алпатова, который будет рассказывать о языках будущего. Так что приходите, смотрите на объявление. Спасибо.